This is Laura Vanderkam. I'm a mother of 5, an author, journalist, and speaker.
And this is Sarah Hart-Unger. I'm a mother of 3, a practicing physician, and blogger on the side. We are 2 working parents who love our careers and our families.
Welcome to Best of Both Worlds. Here we talk about how real women manage work, family, and time for fun. From figuring out childcare to mapping out long-term career goals, we want you to get the most out of life. Welcome to Best of Both Worlds. This is Laura. This is episode 248, airing in early May of 2022. Sarah is going to be interviewing Lisa, who's a listener of ours, who has been making her way through medical school with a baby. So talk about sort of different ways one can plan a medical career and growing your family at the same time. So Sarah, sort of maybe you could remind our listeners when in the process you began your family, right? Because there's different stages of medical training.
Yes. So I did not have children until my fellowship. So my career and training trajectory was actually, I did 5 years of medical school because, as I've discussed, I was initially MD PhD. So I had an extra research year in there and left with a master's. So I had 5 years of med school / research. I had 3 years of pediatrics residency and 3 years of pediatric endocrinology fellowship. I started trying to get pregnant around the beginning of my 3rd year of residency, but was unsuccessful for quite some time and ended up getting pregnant, I think, late in my 2nd year of fellowship, I guess, and then had Annabelle towards the end. So that's interesting. I had 1 full year of fellowship with a baby, which was mostly a research year. And that was a year that we, used daycare. It was a challenging year, but a doable year. So the reason I'm saying that is because my path is very easy, I think, compared to having a baby or multiple babies during the medical school years or the early residency years when you have a lot of core rotations that are just incredibly demanding in terms of, as I wrote, brute force hours. Like there's nothing you can do to, for example, in the program that I'm run, their hospital medicine rotation, many of them are in the hospital for close to 80 hours a week on average. And that includes some night work, lots of weekend work. There is just not a way to say during that month, you can carve out lots of balance and time with your baby. 80 hours is a lot of the week. 168 minus 80 minus time for sleeping is not that many hours when you factor in self-care and other things. So there are some, not every week in residency is like that, mind you, at least not in our program, maybe in some surgical programs. But there are some where it's going to be incredibly challenging. So my heart goes out to these residents and med students who are doing this and who have made the choice to do this. And I certainly understand why you might make the choice to do this based on your age and fertility constraints and how many children you want and your life vision or just what ended up happening in certain cases. But I'm not going to say it's an easy or right choice for everyone because it would have to be incredibly challenging. So I'm very excited to hear what the journey has been like for Lisa, who has volunteered to share with us on this podcast, kind of some of the ups and downs of that trajectory.
Yeah. I mean, because of course, one of the problems of being in training is that you also aren't earning as much as you will later. Although, the issues, of course, is that medicine can be a great career, that Sarah's obviously done very well with it. Many of our guests have as well. And it can be a great career for combining work and family. There's just some patches of it that are rougher than others. And so, we encourage people not to write it off either.
Oh, 100%. I just think the timing needs to be thought through carefully. I would argue that I did it the easy way compared to how this person did it. Who knows? Maybe if I had been unlucky, I wouldn't have remained as fertile into my late 30s and couldn't have had the number of kids that I wanted. So I'm not saying to everybody, hey, put it off, whatever. But for me, I feel like it turned out to be a somewhat lucky thing. The cash piece is hard too. I mean, that really depends on the partner, right? Because if you're a two med student couple, nobody's earning money, that's difficult. If you are a 2 resident couple, you have very little work-life balance to spare. You can't necessarily rely on your resident partner to cover on a weekend. They might be assigned to work that same weekend, so that adds its own challenges. Plus, residents don't make tons of money. If you have a partner that does something else, and I had friends in that situation, that was the easier situation, if somebody's partner was an accountant or a lawyer and actually earning a reasonable paycheck to help pay for childcare, that certainly makes it an easier journey. But I do feel like I had it pretty easy because yes, my husband was a fellow, but I was also a fellow in a fairly flexible subspecialty in the later phases of my fellowship where it wasn't as much clinical. So, and then by the time we had multiple kids, we were in our careers and had enough funds to cover a nanny, which was, amazing and the right choice for us. So yeah, there are so many different ways to do this. Some are easier than others, but I'm excited to hear this because it's just very different from my experiences, but there's no one right way.
No one right way. And if, intentionally or not, if somebody finds themselves expecting a baby in medical school or residency, you are also not doomed.
And you are not alone.
It's going to work out wonderfully. It's going to be great. And that is our, there are always challenges. But, one of our messages here at Best of Both Worlds is you're a smart person and you will figure it out and it's going to be great. And you have a beautiful career and a beautiful family. So, but Lisa's definitely going to talk about some of the challenges too. So we're excited to hear from her. And so we'll go ahead and dive right into that.
I am so excited to welcome Lisa Green on the podcast. Lisa emailed us and her story was so fascinating to both Laura and I that we decided she had to come on and share it. And Lisa has a medical background as well. She is a medical student at the University of Kansas. And welcome, Lisa. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm trying not to fangirl a little, but it is such an honor to be on the podcast and be able to come and share my story.
No, we are super, super happy to have you. And I think we actually do need to make sure we feature people with different stages of their families and young kids and training. So I think this is actually a great episode on so many levels. So Lisa, take us back. Give us a little bit of background, maybe how things were when you started med school and what you were thinking about in terms of starting a family. And then let the listeners know the story that captivated Laura and I via email.
Yeah, so like Dr. Hart-Unger said, my name is Lisa, and I am a rising third-year med student
I just have to interrupt you because I am Sarah
Yes.
on this podcast. Sarah, don't call me Dr. Hart-Unger. I feel so bizarre.
Oh, sorry. I think that's habit. Sorry. Okay, Sarah.
Okay, keep going.
Okay. Sorry. Your thing kept freezing, so I'm like, just making sure I'm not missing anything. Okay. Yeah, so like Sarah said, my name is Lisa, and I am a rising third-year med student in the Midwest, where I live with my husband, Ethan, and our 15-month-old son, Fitz. And I say that I'm a rising third-year med student because I am actually coming back from a year of maternity leave that was very, very unexpected. Fitz was not unexpected. He was planned, but just kind of the whole story of how I became a new mom, first-time mom in med school, did not look anything like we thought it would. So I am what you would consider a non-traditional med student. So the traditional path for med school is typically like a 4-year college, and then you can go straight into med school after. And I just took a little longer to decide what I wanted to be when I grew up. So I started med school in my late 20s. And my husband and I have been together for 10 years, and we have been married for 5. So we knew that kids was on the horizon. And one thing that we wanted to weigh while we were trying to figure out when the best time, quote unquote, for kids during my training would be was our support system. So I actually go to school in the city where my husband and I both grew up. So both of our families are here. And so we were like, we'd rather try to do this while we have family support, which means having a baby during med school instead of waiting till residency or hopefully when I'm an attending in the future. So we planned on starting to try my second year, and we were very fortunate that it went along just as we planned. But unfortunately, in the spring of 2020, the world shut down, as we're all still recovering from. And at that point, there was no undo button because Fitz was already on board. So we kind of just committed. We were still so excited. And I think I went into it with a lot of pressure on myself, not even with COVID and being in med school, but just being a working mom and knowing that expectations can be so difficult, and especially in the medical field, where as a student, you kind of feel like you're under a magnifying glass 24/7. For any listeners who aren't in the medical world, they might not realize that we basically overanalyze everything that we do. You want to make sure that you're doing everything to get in a good position for residency and, in a good place with your med school. And I did not want to be that girl that got pregnant and had a baby. And then, all of my med school aspirations just went out the window. So I went in newly pregnant in my second year with just a lot of pressure and a lot of determination to not be that pregnant med student. Flash forward to January of 2021, I gave birth and it was great. But unfortunately, because I was so determined to not let anything get in my way, I actually still attended class while in active labor. So the day I waddled in, we were still, since it was COVID, we were still doing virtual things through school, which actually added to the pressure because a faculty member had kind of offhandedly been like, oh, you planned this at a perfect time. Everything's virtual, so you won't miss anything. And I took that as that I didn't really have permission to even ask if I could miss anything. So we have a photo of me laying in the bed, having a contraction, and still participating in a small group activity. And I remember I hung up from that small group activity and immediately asked for an epidural.
Okay, I have to interrupt for a second because I am just like, I'm actually, even hearing it, it's very shocking to me. So was there a plan? Was there a leave plan in place? Like, had you discussed, okay, when I get the working up to the labor part. I sort of get that. I remember submitting a poster when I was like, oh, my contractions are close together. I guess this is done. Submit. Like, not as much as being in class, but I get that part. But the part where you were going to just like, it doesn't sound like there was any discussion of when there would be a break. Like, oh, awesome. Everything's virtual. So you can just like have a baby and like, you can hear me struggling. So was there a conversation? Was there a discussion of length of time off, a plan to make up time that you might miss? And I hate to ask this, but I'm going to guess that whoever, and I'm not throwing anybody under the bus, but like, was it a woman who had kids who had met with you?
It was not. I'll say that without revealing too much. There wasn't really a plan. When I was newly pregnant and I found out, I knew very early that I needed to get my school on board and get involved. And I had talked to some other med students in classes above me who had gone through having a baby, both, women and men at med students. And they'd all said the school was wildly supportive, which they were. But unfortunately, a lot of it was advocacy for yourself. So you kind of had to be the one to advocate and say, hey, I'm going to take X, Y, and Z. I'm going to need X, Y, and Z. And I just didn't feel like I had permission to do any of that, which looking back, if I could do it all over again, I would change so many decisions. And the very first one would be not being afraid to ask for what I wanted or what I needed. Because it plays such a big part into my story. I did not take any maternity leave initially. So I was back in class the very next day, less than 12 hours after giving birth. I hopped back on and nobody questioned it. Everyone was just like, hey, Lisa. And then I took an in-person exam 10 days after giving birth. So I was still, for anybody who's given birth, I was still wearing those postpartum diapers, dragging all my pumping supplies along. So I was a mess. And honestly, like when I retell this story, obviously it's horrifying, especially for people who've been through giving birth and know, all of just the complications that could have come up. I was very, very lucky that I didn't have any major medical complications and that Fitz was healthy and that we had, my husband had time off. But looking back, I cringe. But in the moment, it was what I needed to do. I really felt like this was what I needed to do to avoid any, impact to my career, anything like that. And I remember everyone was like, oh my gosh, Lisa, like, I can't believe you're doing it. You're super mom. I could never do what you're doing. And in a roundabout way, that kind of fueled the pressure on me because everyone was like, you're doing great. And even if I felt like I wasn't doing great, I felt like I had to live up to those comments and that, what everyone was perceiving, which was that I was this wildly functional, successful second-year med student who had a baby and just kept on rolling.
I wish I had a time machine where I could have told you to email Best of Both Worlds and ask how you might frame this with your mentors or, oh my goodness, like that's so, and I really do, I have to believe that like if you had found the right person to talk to, they would have come up with so many ideas and alternatives to what ended up happening.
Yeah. Well, and that all kind of plays into like the second half of my story, which is, I finished my second year of med school on time. Fitz was like 4 or 5 months old, and step season started, which, again, for anyone who's not familiar, step one is our very big first board exam. It's a very, very lots of pressure, high stakes. We're like given time off from school, all the things. And I went into, one of the biggest exams of my life trying to study, and I just fell apart. It was not good.
How could
It
you
was not
not?
pretty.
I'm sure you were not sleeping. I definitely was able to dedicate like a solid month of basically just studying while I followed my own schedule, did whatever I wanted all day, answered to no one, did a million questions. Like I literally can't imagine. We have to actually take a very quick ad break, and then I want to continue from that point. But Lisa, oh my goodness, like I'm having an emotional reaction to this. Okay, we will be right back. Okay, we are back. So she's got a 4-month-old. She is not sleeping. She's been attending classes while nursing around the clock, being up all night. And it sounds like the exam was not the best day.
No, so I actually didn't end up taking STEP. It really hit ahead. I did not realize that I had really severe postpartum depression. I did not check any of the boxes that they tell you to look out for. So I didn't think it was me. I just didn't even recognize it in myself. I loved Fitz. I was bonding with him. I was happy. I felt joy. So I didn't think depression, anxiety was not on my list. But I remember it all came to a head one day. I had to go to campus in person for a in-person meeting. And my husband and I, because we're both sleep deprived and stressed, had gotten in an argument right before. And Fitz started crying in the middle of it. And, we're just not having a good time. And I immediately had to leave, take off my mom and wife hat and put on my happy med student hat and go to med school. And in the weeks leading up, I had been having these little voices in my head saying maybe Fitz would be better with someone else. Maybe you aren't the mom for Fitz. Just because I was studying all the time, I wasn't able to do the Pinterest activities and just coo over him. It was very all business. He would lay in his boppy next to me while I studied. And that day, it just all came to a head. And as I was driving to school, I remember thinking Fitz is crying because we're arguing, and that's my fault, if I wasn't in med school. And again, looking back, it was not rational thinking, but when you're in the moment, when you're a new mom, you're exhausted, you're trying to balance a career, you're trying to balance figuring out how to keep a human alive, it's the most sane reaction. And so I just started driving, and my plan was just to drive until I didn't want to drive anymore. And I laugh because I actually had to stop at a Target, 30 miles away from our house to buy pumping supplies because I had forgotten the valves. And so even in this absolute emotional meltdown, mental crisis, I was still having to put on the hat of being a mom. And that was it was a breaking point. And I'm very, very fortunate. We have therapy services through our school. And I had just started meeting with her, and my therapist was wonderful at just kind of hearing this and being like, hi, if you need someone to give you permission to take a break, I'm going to tell you that. So she basically advocated and she set up an appointment with our dean and said, Lisa cannot take step one. She should not take step one. She needs to go and be herself and not have this pressure. And so that is how I ended up taking a very unexpected year off. And in the moment, I was devastated. I felt like I had failed as a med student. I'd failed as a mom. But now looking back after the year off, it was the best decision that I have made. And it has not only not negatively affected my career so far, but it's really given me perspective to go back as a med student and just really be on fire to fix everything that I went through for working moms.
I have to get a little bit of clarity here. What part of you, were there logistical worries about taking time off before? Was it all just your expectations? Had your partner weighed in on it? I'm somebody who took an extra year because I left my PhD. So I graduated med school in 5 years. And I guess I did go to a school where a lot of people did extra research time, or some people did like an MBA. So graduating not with your class was seen as like, some people do it, some people don't. Like, it wasn't like you had to go straight through or something terrible would happen. And we also had this wonderful allergy immunology physician on the podcast. I don't know if you heard her. She was awesome. Like maybe a year ago, who actually, like, I think she was a pediatrician or internal medicine doctor, and then took like years off, did nothing, and then did a fellowship like way late in life. So totally different pathways. So we know there are other models that work. Yet in the moment, it sounds like you were telling yourself this story that like, nope, straight through, only way out. Like, what do you think that was about?
Yeah. So I think part of it came from wanting to be the exception. You hear about, again, with the postpartum depression, you hear about the prevalence of that in women, and you just always think, well, that couldn't happen to me. And for me, it was, well, other people have to take the year off, but I planned for this, so I'll be fine. And obviously that is not healthy thinking. I think being in a competitive field, being in medicine where you already feel like wanting to be a mom can sometimes be seen as a negative strike on your report card. People would ask me, oh, what are you going to do? When you have residency interviews, what are you going to do? Like, where's the kid going to go when you have rotations? Which, again, like, now that I'm on the other side of it, I'm like, we have childcare. Like, I can exist outside of being Fitz's mom. But in the moment, I really didn't know how to separate those two. And I didn't know how to put the brakes on either of those paths, either of those identities. And so for me, it was just, I have to keep going. I have to keep going with both of them, and I can't stop. And I think the other thing that played into it was a lot of social media. In fact, I know that you're off Instagram right now, and that actually ended up playing a really big part because it can be a really great thing. There's a lot of wonderful, wonderful doctors who are parents on Instagram and Twitter, and they are just fantastic to follow. But they also make you feel like you should be able to do it all because they're doing it all. And I think sometimes I forgot that I wasn't them. I was in a different, even if I wasn't attending like them, I have a totally different story. So I was kind of competing with these people that I didn't even know who were doing what I wanted to do. And I felt like I had to make it look like them.
Or it looked like they were doing what you wanted to do.
Yes, which again,
because who knows what, and that's so interesting. Yeah, it's like that hustle, I can do it all culture, and like badass mom, boss, doctor lady. And I definitely kind of know what you're getting at. But then the truth behind some of those is like, okay, because you're an Instagram star, you now see patients 1 day a week and you have a staff that follows you around. And like, it's not,
yes.
And yet you're making it look like you're super doctor mom. And so, wow, I'm sorry that played a role, because that makes me sad.
No, and it's like I said, it's a good thing and it's a bad thing. And also we were in the middle of COVID. So we didn't have, we'd planned to have this baby because we thought we would have the family care, and we didn't because it was COVID. So it was kind of a perfect storm. But I think really the turning point for me was identifying that I had postpartum depression, and that, it doesn't always look like you are, non-functional or you aren't bonding with your kid. Even my husband, we were just talking about this. He said they talked to him before we left the hospital and gave him this checklist. And he said, I looked at it when I felt like something was off. And he's like, you didn't check any of those boxes. So I think realizing that was impacting me more than I thought it would. And then also getting permission to put on the brakes, to know that you can do both. You can do both well. Some people are able to transition to motherhood and career without having to take a break. And some people need to take a break, and that's okay. And also, maternity leave is a very important thing. So,
yes, we were in the intro to this episode. I talked about how I feel like I had it so easy because I had my first child during like the research years of my fellowship. And so I don't even understand the struggle of what it's like to have a baby in residency or in medical school. So doing that even in and of itself is a challenge. So if you had a med student who is a first year right now come to you and say like, Lisa, I'm pregnant. What should I do? What would you tell her?
Oh man. The first thing I would say is it's gonna be okay. I think even though we had planned when you get pregnant, when you have a child on the way in any way, shape, or form, if you're planning to adopt, anything like that, it's just nerves. You start freaking out and it's a lot. And I think I would tell them to have a plan. I don't think I advocated for myself well enough. I wish that I had advocated for maternity leave again. I took no maternity leave, and looking back, that was not well. That was not well planned. That was not good for my health. And I wish that I had been more. I'm sorry, I'm totally blanking. I wish I had been more insistent on getting some kind of a mentor at my med school, because I go to a huge med school, and there had to have been a doctor who was also a mom who would have been able to kind of tell me a little more about what to expect. And also, I would just tell, past me, even future med students, anyone who's in a career where they get pregnant and they feel like they have to choose, or they have to kind of go for both of those, that you don't have to. You don't have to do both well the entire time. You can hold both. You can take time to be, more mom for a while, which is what I've been for the last year. And then, go back to a season where maybe you're a little more in your job. I would definitely say take a maternity leave.
I love it. Yes, I think, from the supervisory perspective, I don't know what it's like to work with med students, but I love it. If a resident came to me, and I've had many residents, well, a lot of them had their babies like right before, but I have lots of residents with babies, I'll put it that way, and a couple who have had babies. But when they come to me and they're like, this is what I want to do. I want to use these weeks for this. I want to take this leave. I want to do this and this. Like, usually it's like, great. Oh my gosh, you've thought about it. Like, this makes so much sense. And then we even look at it closer to be like, is that going to be enough recovery time? Like, let's have a game plan for like, what if you don't feel ready in this case? So like have like different pathways and scenarios. But I think the more, this is the planning part of me coming out, but like the more you really think about what a realistic reentry might look like, a lot of times the people who are in charge, at least from my experience, will be like, oh, wow, this is very well thought out. And as long as it's, not breaking any rules, they're going to be so supportive.
Yes. And I think that is the other thing, is not being afraid to ask for what you need, because probably no one is going to ask for it for you. I think I kind of was expecting for, someone to tell me at some point, like, okay, well, now you're going to go on leave. And then they didn't. And I just assumed that meant that I couldn't, instead of, if I had just said, hey, I'm going to need some time off, I'm sure my school would have accommodated it. And I just didn't know to ask for that and, keep that time sacred.
So in terms of now, obviously you totally don't have to have it like laid out what you're planning to do next. And you can speak in vagueness if that helps. But like, if you end up planning for future kids, or not planning and just having future kids, like, how do you think you will handle it differently this time around?
Again, I am going to go in with a very firm demand for time off after giving birth. But I also think that I'm going to kind of hold it more loosely. The expectations that I have for myself and that I have for even the baby. Fitz was kind of like a unicorn baby in that he's very chill. He has just always been just happy to snuggle. So I did a lot of baby wearing and studying and attending class. But I know that, if and when we choose to have another one, we could have a totally opposite personality. And so I think just being gentler with myself and not setting the bar so high that I am just constantly trying to achieve being the unicorn mom of the unicorn baby and making it all look easy and buying into everyone saying that I'm making it look easy. And on that note too, I think I'm going to ask for help so much more next time. Obviously, COVID was a little bit of a factor, but I think I was viewing asking for help kind of like a weakness. When I had friends offering to come over and watch him while I studied or slept, I had a hard time saying yes. And so I think this time around, I'm going to be a lot better about, saying, hey, I would love some help. And my baby is not going to love me any less if he's sleeping on me while I study, or if he's sleeping on a friend while I'm getting some of those study times in.
It could be a new form of therapy, like sitting with a baby on you. I would sign up for that.
I know.
I'll be the
now
friend.
I'm like, people kept wanting to cuddle my newborn and, and I wouldn't say yes. And now I'm like, no, I'll hold your newborn for you. So
I love it. Oh my goodness. Well, thank you so much for sharing your story. I think it takes a braveness and a boldness, and I think it will serve you well in your next step in your career. So super excited to hear what you have in store for yourself in the future, and you'll have to keep us updated.
yes.
But for now, let's go into our love of the week. Do you have a love of the week completely related or unrelated to share?
I do. So I actually thought through two. My first one is that I got an air fryer for Christmas, and that has changed our lives. I am absolutely obsessed. We air fry everything now. Vegetables, air fry them. Chicken, air fry it. Pizza, air fry it. It has really, really transformed. So I am studying for STEP again since I never took it. And being able to air fry meals that feed the whole family and feed us quickly has been incredible. And then also my second love of the week, which disclaimer, I do work part-time for this company, but I actually love them, is an app called Marco Polo. So it's like a video messaging app where you can record. It's kind of like video text messaging. But since I'm studying, I don't have my phone on me a lot. And it has been really, really nice to be able to get messages on my time. And then also sharing fits videos with like family members and friends without having to post them on Facebook or Instagram, and still sharing how cute he is, because obviously I'm biased, but I think he's really cute all the time. So
Oh my gosh. I bet Marco Polo has a high percentage of baby videos, because I know my sister loves it to chat with her friends, and they all have like toddlers and babies. So.
Yes. Who doesn't love a good baby video in your day?
Exactly. Well, mine is very basic. I discovered Justin's extra dark peanut butter cups. Different than the regular dark ones. I just happened to be online grocery shopping and I picked them up, and they're super good. They really don't have, I think they're like 5 grams of sugar. Like, they're not a lot of sugar because it's super, super dark chocolate, but they're really peanut buttery and they're good. So that's my new favorite chocolate thing.
Are you a dark chocolate over milk chocolate fan?
I'm a super dark chocolate person. Like, I like the chocolate that like people are like, that's gross because it's bitter, but I think it's good.
It's good. Okay, wait, really fast. I have to ask on the chocolate. What is your favorite brand of dark chocolate?
I really like Theo a lot, actually. They're based in California or Seattle, one of those. Actually, I think it's Seattle, and I think I smelled their headquarters once when I was visiting somebody. But Theo's really good. Why? What do you like? Tell me.
I'm on the hunt for like the perfect dark chocolate. It's kind of my reward for myself when I'm studying, which may not be the healthiest relationship with food, but we do what we can to get through like practice questions. So I just found a local company that makes dark chocolate. But before that, it was Trader Joe's.
Ooh, oh, Trader Joe's. That's semi-sweet. That stuff is excellent. Or the bittersweet. Good taste. Good taste. We'll try out Theo. They have a lot of good varieties.
Yeah, thank you.
Hashtag not an ad. All right, Lisa, thank you so much for coming on. This was a wonderful conversation, and I know it will help others. And so please, if you have comments for Lisa, maybe Laura, when she does the show notes, you can ask her and she can like respond if there's questions or anything. But I just think this was so informative and a powerful story. So thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Well, that was very good, and a lot of things to think about there with Lisa. So this question is another medical-based one. This is our all medicine episode here. But this is definitely for Sarah. She says, I've been an avid listener. I got to work on that. Both your podcasts for the past year. Wants to thank Sarah for all she's doing, because this listener, as an early career physician, looks up to her and has, hopes everything goes well for Sarah. And she says she's weathering through everything with grace. Go, Sarah. She wants some perspective because she is heading into her last year of cardiology fellowship and is starting the job search process. She wants to start a family soon, and is, of course, therefore interested in work-life balance. Cardiology is a procedure-heavy field with a heavy emphasis on RVUs, which Sarah can explain to everyone in a minute. I have recently realized that the best fit for me might be a clinical academic position, and, partly for the work-life balance aspect, partly for some of her non-clinical interests. She says she's curious whether you'd be willing to share what your considerations were when finding and negotiating for your first job. Did you have a systematic way of weighing the things that were important to you, or anything different you would have done or asked from potential employers?
So this is a great question. I guess I'll first start with what is an RVU? Anyone in medicine knows, but it stands for relative value units, which is just a way of quantifying how much. Basically, it's like the form of billable hours, but for doctors, like based on what type of visits and procedures you do and how you code them. And, depending on how productive you are, you may have a certain number of RVUs that you earn per month. Some contracts pay you based on the RVU, some don't. And so that's actually an important thing to look at. So I made this list. Now, the caveat before I even read the list is you cannot walk into an interview and just ask these things. You will not get the job. You have to demonstrate your excitement, your interest. Of course, you have to have done your homework and learned all about the program, knowing its strengths, knowing maybe some of the past accomplishments of the people you're interviewing with, all these things. And then once you get a sense that they want you, or perhaps you can kind of read between the lines with different interviewers, you can get the answers to some of these questions. But I have seen it where people kind of come in with this checklist of wants, and particularly the people senior to me are oh, no, we can't, it's just another person who wants to protect her work-life balance. And to me, I'm well, what's wrong with that, right? But there's definitely still this cultural, pretending that you want to give your entire life into this without concern for anything else being the default. And I don't even mean that in an individual way, but I guess I would just be careful because you can turn some people off, even though I 100% know where you're coming from. And I think you do need to figure out the answers to some of these tougher questions. So that was my big caveat/disclaimer. So to me, if I were looking for another job, very important things would be, what does the call schedule look like? So is it reasonable? Is it fair? Is it an acceptable lifestyle for myself and my family? How busy is call? How many times do you get woken up per night? Do you have to come in? What does that look like? What does the patient template look like? Is it reasonable? Now, I'm not saying oh, you want to see as few patients as possible per day, because not at all. You want to be efficient. You want to be able to get your patients in and see them, but to make sure that it's realistic, or that you have good clinical support so that people don't feel like they are kind of running up against a clock and always losing at the end of every day. So you can kind of get a sense if you ask people kind of what does a normal clinic day look like for you, you'll probably get a sense about the answer to that. Support. Now, this is huge, and this is a current crisis in healthcare because so many people are leaving healthcare in the support staff positions, and maybe this will change. It hopefully is a short-term thing, but I would find out who does the prior authorizations. I am very lucky, and I hope this stays true, but I don't ever do my own prior authorizations, which is the negotiations you have to do with insurance to get your patient's medicines covered. We have nurses and other staff members that do those, and I'm incredibly grateful for that. And if I were ever looking for another job, which I'm not planning to, but if I did, that would be one of my questions that I would ask towards the end, who does the prior auths in your office, or what is the procedure for prior authorizations? Collegiality is really, really important. So you want to figure out, again, hard to ask this directly, but really watch the interactions that go on. Do people like each other? Do people treat each other nicely? Do the staff and the physicians seem to have a nice rapport, or does it seem both levels are sort of at odds with each other? Do the colleagues want to have casual conversations and get-togethers outside of work? I love the people I work with. I consider it a huge benefit to my job in and of itself. And so I can't imagine, having a work situation where you didn't have a really nice and friendly atmosphere where people were free to communicate, but also genuinely cared for each other. So getting a sense of that is important. Then there's the math stuff. So what's the cost of living? That can matter more than the salary. The salary might be double, but if you're living in the Bay Area, you will not feel it whatsoever. So looking at kind of the ratio between what the area costs to live and what the salary looks like is very important. So don't just take salary at face value. Think about even things like schools. Will you be able to live somewhere that the public schools will serve your family, or will you have to, or consider investing in, or not investing, but wanting to pay for private school? Factor all of these things in, because it's not just a raw number calculation. And then finally, what is the kind of compensation model? And there's no right answer to this. It's going to vary depending on what kind of health system it is, whether it's a private practice or a larger hospital-owned group. But, some are RVU-based, some are bonus-based, some are salaried. You really want to, again, once the job's been offered to you and they're waiting for you to sign your portion, you want to really understand what this model looks like, because I have heard some sad stories of people who like signed all RVU-based contracts, but then found that they weren't busy and that they couldn't drum up the business that they needed. It wasn't that they were being lazy, but like they're like, I need to see more patients to earn these RVUs, but like, unfortunately, there aren't enough, and then you're sort of stuck. And again, I've heard like horror stories about people having to like pay back portions of salary. Again, nothing from my personal experience, just talking about friends in other random places. So just be careful and look at all of that. And then location might trump everything, because you may want to be near family, or you may have ties to a certain area. And I'll admit that I didn't do any of this really in my job search. Well, I guess I did pay attention to collegiality when I took my job, and I feel like I lucked into a lot of the other aspects, but I was location constrained. I knew I wanted to be in South Florida, and as a subspecialist, there weren't like a million different options to choose from. So I only looked at 2, and it ended up working out really well for me. But statistically, I think something like, well, I don't know the percentage, but a fairly high percentage of physicians do change jobs within a few years. So just like be careful about the details. And also look at what the exit clauses are like as well. If you do change your mind, are you allowed to exit your contract without a problem? Or is there going to be certain things that you have to, pay back or are tied to from a location perspective?
All good things to do. I would just add one thing to this, because I think people can get a little bit too hung up on the question of work-life balance. I think it's very important, but we sometimes say like, oh, well, this is a version of the job that has good work-life balance and everything else is not. Like if you truly, truly want to be clinical academic position, that's great. If that is what you want to be doing. I would caution that sometimes if you're in a good, busy practice, you could be earning as much doing procedures 3 days a week as you would be in sort of an academic setting working 5 days a week. And so like you know, you might have a better balance working part-time doing procedures versus, a job that is lower paid and full-time, but theoretically has better work-life balance. It's just, don't automatically go with the assumption of what is a good job for a woman with a family and what is not a good job for a woman with a family, because I think sometimes the higher paid jobs offer more ability to make things work than some other ones do. So I would just put that out there.
Interesting. I think really like asking the people in the practice, what does their lifestyle look like, is going to be a lot of the best indicator in terms of, will this fit you? Just take me through a week in the life. Take me through a day in the life. What happens if your kids are home from school? Like actually learning what it looks like for others. Because there are some fields that are extremely male dominated. So there may not be a model for this, but in many, including cardiology, there's going to be probably at least some women that you can talk to about, how it looks for them and whether that sounds like it would be workable for you.
Yeah. Sounds good. All right. Well, this has been Best of Both Worlds. It's been a medicine-focused episode, talking with our listener, Lisa, about having a baby in medical school and what that looks like. We will be back next week with more on making work and life fit together.
Thanks for listening. You can find me, Sarah, at theshoebox.com or at _shoebox on Instagram.
And you can find me, Laura, at lauravanderkam.com. This has been the Best of Both Worlds podcast. Please join us next time for more on making work and life work together.